O tēnā no tāu.
Tēnā koe.
Tēnā no tāua I roto I tō tāua nei whare. Te rākau tipo e tū nei. I runga o tō koutou maunga puke ahu. Nāna I karanga hi e tāua. Ki runga I tōna taumata ki te whakawhiti kōrero. Te whakawhiti whakaaro mō tō tāua kaupapa. Nā reira e te tuakane ngā tai tēnā koe. Tēnā koe I roto I te hononga ki wainganui a tāu. Ngā mahi kua mahi e tāua I roto I ngā tau. Me o pūkenga o mā tauranga I tākoha mai ki tō tātou kaupapa. Anei te uri o Apanui. Ka hunganu ngā tira kai pāka, ngā tiko nohi. Mai tuahuriri ngā te wheke, pautini ara hura e tuku mihi atu ki a koe. I runga I era o ngā whakaaro. Me te mea hoki, e kite ngā whare he hoki ngā mahara. E kite ngā whare he hoki ngā mahara ki a rātau I parea te huarahi, I roto I ngā tau, a rāko taua karaua rā, huirangi, a mere, a tiariki mei, a li, a Martin Winiata, o taku whaia hoki. Rātau katoa. I whakatoa te kākano kia puawai ai tētahi wāhi kia Māori ake taua wāhi rā. Hei whare whakaruru hau mō ngā tauira I taua wā tonu I whai tonu I tō tāua nei reo. Arā, anei ke te kanohi o taua whakaaro, nā koutou ko tō tira, I hanga, I tārai, I whakairo, I peita, I tuitui. Nā reira, me mihi ka tika ki rā ngā huatanga. Kua whakarite ai tēnei wā, mō tāua, ki te noho ki tōna, ki roto I tōna puku, ki te whakairi I ake e tahi atu kōrero, ki runga I ona pakitara. Nā reira, koutou o taranaki whānau I tiaua tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou koutou e manaki nei, I poipoi nei a mātou ngā rāwaho. I noho, ki roto, ki runga, I a koutou, I roto I ngā tini tau kua hori ake nei. Koutou e whakawāte ai, I nei tuāhuatanga o ngai tāua, kia noho pai ai, kia noho haumaru ai, kia whai oranga ai, ki roto I tō koutou rohe pōtai. Nā reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe, kai te tuakana. Hoi no, tēnā tātou. Hoki mai rā, ki tēnei o kāinga, ki rongi a Pūtea, tō tātou mara o te rau karamu. Me tēnei o ngā piringa whare, ko te whai oronga te whai au. Te whakatīnanatanga mai o era o ngā kaumata whangaro atu ki te pō. Me tātou e mautonu nei I te ia, me te wairua o ngā hiehia mō tēnei o ngā wana. Ko ia rā, te whakatū era I tētei a uru mō ai. Mō tātou te wānanga, ko tāua tēnei. Hoi anō rā, koutou rā e wakarongo ana, nau mai kia piri, nau mai kia tata. Tēnei tamaiti o te kāinga nei, o te pane o te ika, o te maunga puke atua. Whakawhiti mai rā, kia hu mairangi. Ki konei anō oki, I raro I te marumaru o mātairangi. Me ngā pā o Pūtea, tatu atu rā ki Waiputu, ki te tau o te pō. Tēnei te mokopuna, tupu mai ki konei. Hoi no, ka whakawhiti atu rā ki ka ununu ki Wairarapa. Ngā kāwai whakapapa o te papāwai. Tatu atu rā ki te tau o tōku kraua. Ki Rotorua, te aroa waka. Ki te roro o te rangi tangata. Ngāti whakaue. Me tauranga moana tēnei. Engari mo tēnei kōrero e hoa. He mokopuna tēnei o te Toi Whakairo.
Kia ora.
He mokopuna tēnei. E kawe nei ngā ngā whakaaro o pāpa, tatu atu rā ki oku mātua tūpuna. Wera tēnā tāu.
Tēnā tāu. Kia ora, e hoa, e ngātai. It's my pleasure being the Poumatua of Toi Mai to welcome us both back to our whare here, te whai o runga te whai ao, to talk about an incredibly important mahi to us both, but also to the wider Kaihanga Toi Māori space, something that we've put a lot of time and whakaaro and effort into. He Toi Whakairo, he Mana Tangata, where there's artistic excellence, there's human dignity. Best practice for Kaihanga Toi Māori in the built environment. And the opportunity for us to sit down within a true reflection of that kaupapa, within the context of a wharenui and marae complex built in the heart of a university. And I think it's poignant and right that we should be in a beautiful taonga like this, which exudes all that we look to express through this process and through this piece of mahi. And I know that we never set out for this to be the one and only way to do things, but I think what's really important for us to talk about in this kōrero is how we got to this point. And in particular, it's really important for us at Toi Mai, as you say, you're a mokopuna of Toi Whakairo, to hear what that input and what your reflections are on this piece of mahi, and where we eventually, when we go to some other questions, we might see this going into the future. And so I suppose the first pātai, Ngatai, is, what was this report all about and who is it designed for?
Well, I think, in our little mihi, we acknowledge the importance of relationships of our space and people, and so to be, for myself, invited to contribute to a discussion around, I think at the time it might have been called Māori Arts, or as I say, Toi Whakairo or Toi Māori, was I think for me an exciting opportunity to continue discussions that I had with yourself and with Claire, and knowing that you took you left this place to go into the vocational learning space, and took all of what you knew about your tertiary and education history into that space. And so my reflection is being asked to come and contribute to a wānanga where many of us gathered to talk about what vocational learning might look like for Toi Māori, or for Toi Whakairo Māori. And so it was nice to sit with other pukenga from different backgrounds and to share thoughts and I guess also experiences around Toi Whakairo or Toi Māori, and discuss what that might look like in the vocational learning space. Going back to those relationships, my father, as you know, after being in the prison service and carving locally with a carver called Jock McEwen, and then moving into clay with the younger inmates in the boys' home, and then moving into studying and becoming a teacher at Whitireia Polytech, and also Wanganui Polytech. So I sort of was a kid growing up around that, really, around Dad, who was engaged in vocational learning at a time where it was actually really quite exciting, particularly on Wanganui and Whetire. So it was nice to be able to just reflect on Dad's journey and the role that Toi Whakairo, Toi Māori can play in terms of its contribution to society and in particular its restoration qualities. When I thought about Dad in education and for our people. So, getting together and just talking about all of those different aspects. And I think you asked some interesting questions around industry. Thinking about, well, we're educating in a vocational learning environment, then what does it look like in terms of preparing somebody for industry? And that's when I think we arrived at one of the of moments of clarity, if you like, in our discussions, where we realised that because of this country's history, that as an industry in its own right, there wasn't actually a defined industry. There was a number of us working in different ways, but in terms of what you'd expect from an industry, that was yet to be defined. And I think that was a moment of, I think for the people in the discussion, in our engagement with as practitioners with Toi Mai, it was a moment of clarity in terms of, well, hang on, if we don't define the industry, then how can we develop a curriculum that can then educate and prepare our people for the space that they're moving into? And so I think it took us from a bit, I mean, you can talk to this a bit more, but it took a little bit of a shift to say, well, the need actually at the moment is to be more deliberate in defining what the industry should look like, should be, so that then we can put in curriculum and education experiences that sets them up for that industry, for want of a better word, that practice. And so that's sort of my recollection in terms of probably some of the key discussion points, acknowledging that, there was between 12 and 15 of us, I think, at the time. And then with reflecting on what an industry may look like, came, I guess, some of the needs of defining what Toi Māori is to us as a people in the first instance, because I think raupatu in our history in this country has meant that we are constantly revitalising and redefining what it is now for us, but wanting to also honour and align our thinking with the beautiful inherent taonga and the knowledge that comes with these taonga. And so, I think that's sort of what we started to do, and then we started talking about what are some of the key needs in terms of defining that industry. And I'm sure you got questions there about that, so I'll stop there. But yeah, that's, I think, in the initial engagement, Toi Mai brought a lot of us practitioners and educators together from the Toi Māori space, and allowed us to jump into the wānanga, and that was for me one of the key discoveries or key moments of discovery, was to say, oh, actually, things have changed. people are keen on what we're doing. And so now we've got to define what that is for ourselves and for everyone else.
Yeah, and I think what was interesting from our perspective in terms of Toi Mai is we knew that wasn't a space for us to be the ones to make the definition, but the opportunity to realise in our early inception that no one was actually taking care of the space. And it hadn't been assigned, as it were, to any of the workforce development councils. And as you know, for Claire and I, more so for her off the back of this mahi, but a mahi that I've been involved with for a long time, that wasn't acceptable. But we also had to be very clear about what our position was in terms of taking this kaupapa forward. And what I particularly appreciated about those wānanga, which I guess can lead into this next part of our discussion, was when the realisation about that defining that industry sank, and then we started to have the kōrero, how we were allowed to put some provocations in there amongst you well-experienced people, and given the opportunity to participate in that wānanga from that position, knowing that we weren't there to be the owners of what was to come out, but that was how we kind of defined our role. And while I want to acknowledge that is when it became clear that we all came to this collective understanding that, hold on, one of the key issues here is Pūtea, you know, and the lack thereof of a clear definition of what that actually means within that environment. You know, and so, you know, can you sort of elaborate a bit more on that as to how that led into the what we did in this report?
Yeah, well, I guess, just in a general vocational education industry sense, you know, you're looking at providing education and training for people to be able to, you know, go out and sustain themselves through that industry and working in that industry. And so with it being undefined, there was an opportunity, I think, for us to think, rethink what that might be, because a number of us are in the art world and all of that. And so what we started talking about was, you know, Toi Whakairo Māori or Toi Māori. What was its value in our ancestors' time? You know, what was before raupatu, before things were strategically, I think, removed from us? What was its value? And it's pretty evident that Toi Whakairo or Toi Māori was present in all spaces of our ancestral society. And so, you know, the voyage is here in the carving of waka. We didn't just carve a vessel, but we imbued it with whakairo that carried a spiritual presence, as well as a genealogical presence and a cosmological presence. And so, you know, it's just, we started thinking about an opportunity to, as I said, restore our relationship and our thinking for our people around Toi Whakairo. Because I think, you know, in some cases, it can be thought about as decoration, as something that, you know, just adorns. But when you look at our meeting houses and some of our older structures of Toi Whakairo that have survived, we all know that it's more than that. It's and it has a life force that starts defining who we are as kin, who we are as people. And so its value to us has always been significant. Now, when you look at the presence of a different value system and the one that we now are able to survive and thrive from, then how do you then reconcile, cultural value that includes spiritual value to the people, etc., with a financial one? And so I think that's a discussion that's evolving, and it's been awesome to think about, because what this project and the realisation did was allowed us to start again, instead of going, oh well, at the moment we get paid this for that. It's actually a step back and go, well, what was it in our ancestral time? What does it need to be for our mokopuna's time? So that even in this current context of this current economy, they can thrive, and particularly those who carry the special responsibility of traversing what we call different realms and offering that to the well-being of everybody and everything. And so when we look at, I don't want to go on too much here, but when you look at that as a moment of discussion, it becomes pretty evident that there's work to do with our wider community, and with our governing agencies and the Crown to I guess understand just how rich Toi Māori and Toi Whakairo can be for the well-being and health of everybody in this country, and that's really important to me, is to continue to advocate for creating spaces of understanding, so that we're amongst the most celebrated in the world for who we are as in our uniqueness in Aotearoa.
And I think that's a key point, the uniqueness of not only Ngai Taua Te Māori, but where we ended up in terms of our discussions. Because I don't think there was any sort of predetermined set that this is going to be an outcome but from a Toimai perspective, at the very least, it was always about throwing the pebble in the pond and seeing what ripples it could create, because we knew our role was only to do that much, and then the kaupapa had to be carried by yourselves and all those other people that came along. And I think what we realised too was the puna that we were looking at was so massive, and we couldn't go, well, how could we dictate this for the entirety of that puna? And so how come, can you just touch on how we ended up in the built environment specifically?
Yeah, well, I think, there's always, when you're trying to define things like this, there's always the danger of centralising and trying to standardise something that actually is very complex and needs to be localised. And so, thankfully, being part of the Te Atiawa and the local tribe here, I think with everybody who was at the table, we at some level discussing some of the needs of the tribes, the iwi, in terms of this current climate and what we needed from our understanding of Toi Whakairo. And so, I think there was enough people in the room to say, hey, we're actually starting to be asked by councils to contribute to the landscape and also contribute to the visual language and the cultural language on the landscape. whether that be in the form of public sculptures or new public buildings like Te Matapi'i ki Te Ao, the new library that's been built. And so, there was a real current need to start defining that as an relatively emergent industry. And because it is an emergent industry, it made sense that we could cover things like tikanga or best engagement practices, remuneration, utu practices, and also kaitiaki. We could cover that, and knowing that actually a lot of that will transfer quite easily into other spaces of Toi Māori. And so it was really probably through one of the current needs and also one of the opportunities that exist at the moment, but will continue to exist, I think, into the future.
So taking that as the context which led us into the built environment space, which is, as you say, Te Matapihi ki Te Ao, Tākina. There's so many other projects here in Te Whanganui Aotearoa that are reflective of, I suppose, their shift and that need to engage with Kaihanga Toi Māori and the likes of yourselves and Rangimā. I guess the challenge that we faced at the time, and I remember the wānanga when we were talking about it ourselves amongst our team, was, what do you look to in order to set that, to try and set a benchmark? Because, the likes of yourselves and others from your iwi like Len, Hetet, Ma, have got to where you've got to, through no defined methodology, but a career of going up, down, backwards, sideways, to get to a point where you're able to know the rates that you're working in.
Yeah.
So, if you just want to elaborate a little bit more on how we sort of got to that point.
Well, I think, if you look at different professions, so the way in which this economy is arranged is that, different professions have different remuneration rates. And so going back to where do we want to locate this practice of Toi Māori in, the range of professions that exist, acknowledging that it's something in our ancestors' time that was very important. And it's something that we have identified as being able to provide a lot of wealth, health and value to community. And so I think the thinking was just to do a bit of a scan, like what's around, and then look at the built environment in particular and go, well, what might be professions that sit alongside, because it's a unique profession, and may be a starting point for establishing remuneration rates. We did that alongside what was already happening with, Len Hiti and Rangi Kipa and Grazer, Graham, in Auckland, Ngāti Whātua. And so we were really lucky to have a group of well-established architects, Māori architects in those wānanga. And you recall, but also we had a few from the Haukainga who were operating in the consultancy space. And so we thought that those two spaces, the Māori consultancy space and the Māori architect space, would be a good place to locate our practice with in terms of remuneration. Because in the built environment, what we often do is that we traverse both. We're not only looking at the visual decisions, the spatial decisions, but we're also contributing to the narrative and also the ethical decisions, the tikanga side. So that's sort of how we approached it, was to say, okay, what do we have now? What does the architectural industry look like and their remuneration rates? And then what does the consultancy industry look like? And we went from there. And I think, we've had wānanga, we've had meetings with the practitioners, and it's now at a stage where it needs to be socialised more, and going back to my point, it needs to be flexible enough to be able to be applied to different regions and different spaces, because potentially there could be shifts from capital cities to more rural public built spaces, in terms of the resource available. So yeah, that's that was the journey.
And I think that you almost summed it up quite well, that the focus of the report was for what we broadly called commissioning agencies, and I suppose the context of the kōrero to date so far has really been around that local Kaihanga Toi interaction with the likes of Wellington City Council, with you got the archives building and various different iterations that are presenting themselves recently and still currently being finished. And then somewhere along the road, we realised that there was another need, because there were multiple voices that we were trying to find within the pūrongo, and we realised that the amount of audiences that we may write to, and I just want to acknowledge our tuahine Elisabetta Heta, who was brought in to pen this kaupapa. And upon reflection, the daunting task she had, because all of what you described so far is this myriad of information that's scattered to the four winds, and trying to figure out how to bring it all together, and then trying to find the tūāpapa that ties it all together was quite a tricky challenge. But when we narrowed it down to the built environment, as you so beautifully summarised this, then we realised that there was some key elements that needed to reflect the different side of things. Can you just talk to that as to how the Rauemi was constructed?
Well, I think, because it's an emerging industry and we're defining it, there was a need to provide clarity for the commissioning agencies. And we chose 3 areas, and there's more, but the 3 key areas, as I've said, was tikanga or best practice engagement. So, what are the key foundational engagement practices that allow our worldview and another worldview to sit together. The second was utu remuneration, and in that remuneration we have 3 different remuneration models. One was a top-down model where you were looking at a percentage of the complete build budget. The second was an hourly rate remuneration model, which was for different types of work, and the third was like a bottom-up, where it's a nominated amount of pūtea for a specific type of work. So you know, trying to provide the spectrum and the scope to respond to as many situations as the model would allow us to. And then the third was around kaitiakitanga, you know, best practice in terms of looking after what we do in the built environment, and in particular looking at the difference between stewardship and ownership, you know, kaitiakitanga. And so one really pleasing thing that I think is happening now is that there's a real desire to collectively, with commissioning agencies, look after these things. And so, you know, different licensing models, lease models, as opposed to ownership models that allow things like whatu mauri or karakia or certain levels of things to be looked after by, you know, the tribe or ourselves as practitioners, but for the commissioning agency to be the home, if you like, and the beneficiaries of those things. And so we were just looking at those models, but what became obvious as we were starting to do them is, actually, as much as our commissioning agencies need to know this information, we've got this whole, you know, generation coming through. And as you've rightfully stated, you know, we've just grabbed a dart and chucked it in the dark and see where it landed often, in terms of having to define, you know, our engagement with different agencies in this space. So Rangi, Len and others have really paved the way, but they've done it, you know, in their own agencies themselves. And so we've realised, we need to share this with our practitioners to consider. You know, it's at this point, it's not to say this is how it is. And then the information becomes different. So to give you an example, with the remuneration rates, you know, we had Tohunga, you know, mātanga, and then Kaihanga, or authority, expert, practitioner. Now, that's to say to commissioning agencies, you know, these are the levels that you are engaged with. Now, when we turn around and our aspirations to build and to extend, then we have tauiro pia. And so that becomes a discussion for the practitioners and how we might remunerate our pia, but not opening the door to go, we can't afford a tohunga, so we'll get a tauira for that bit of work, you know. And so there was just moments of needing to differentiate what we were sharing and saying to commissioning agencies, and to some of these things that brilliant people like Rangi and Len had discovered, and going, well, hey, this is what's been discovered through experience for you to consider when you move into this. That's right. Now, there's another space that I have identified but haven't yet been able to have the time to get into, and it's really important in where everything's going, and it's where the iwi sit, you know, and also iwi understanding, and our understanding of expectations of iwi, and then how we then work as practitioners, as mandated tribal members together to ensure that what we're doing, you know, for that commissioning agency is, I guess, as collective and concise as it needs to be, you know. And so that's an area that, among others, that we've decided, you know, we're talking with Len, well, we'll do that at a niwi level ourselves. So that's, yeah, for me, that's how we came to that, as that, like you said, as Elizabeth started writing everything up, we realised, there's a conversation there and information for that conversation that's different to this, crossovers. And then there's another space here. And there'll be other spaces, once courses are established, then of course that's another, how do you then transform this, all of these, guidelines into a curriculum so that people are graduating and knowing, well, this is what I do. This is how I act. And this has been, mandated from this space. I think there's a fear. There's a fear to define this. And my response to that is, if we don't, then others will define it for us.
Koia.
And if we don't, then the next generation will have to do what we did. Or they'll have to find their way through, be blowing around in the wind until they find themselves, and then, don't do what rangi and them have done. And so I do think it's time for us as a people, nationally, to define at least the bones of the house. If we think about this house, we define the tāhuhu, and those things are fixed. But each iwi and each circumstance can start defining the heke, where there's room for the diversity of needs. But I think we really need this tāhuhu for our mokopuna, and that's where the next part of socialising and coming to some sort of national agreement needs to happen.
Kia ora. Well, I know that you and I could sit underneath the canopy of this beautiful rākau for many, many more moments. But I just want to say on behalf of Toi Mai that thank you for your input. Thank you for your guidance. Thank you for enabling us to follow one of our drivers, which was to try and leave a mark and transform something.
Yeah.
In a particular area that is so close to, as you know, mine and Claire's heart. And we wish we could continue on to support the ongoing kōrero. But as you said, at some point in time, you make your contribution to a kaupapa, and then you might need to step out and then leave that for the next lot of minds and hands to take. And I am certainly one that will follow the development of these kōrero as they happen, hopefully where they happen. And I just want to say on behalf of Claire and myself and the whole whānau of Toi Mai, thank you for all the wonderful contributions you've made to our mahi in the last couple of years. And we wish you all the best in your ongoing endeavours to continue to do the mahi that you described, that still needs to happen in the spaces that need those other conversations that those people have started.
Yeah, kia ora, bro.
I runga i raunga whakaro, ka rongo au i te ia o tō tāua kōrero, ka tae te ki atu kua mutu i nainei, engari kua mutu te kōrero, kare kore ka haere tonu te wānanga. Nā reira, me mihi ka tika ki a koe te tuakana mō tēnei kōrero ki wāngiru i a tāua.
Yeah, well, as I sit here, I am doing my best to represent the voices of the multitudes of practitioners that where this sits close to their hearts. And I think on behalf of us all, really like to thank the team, Toi Mai, Claire, yourself, Nā Rongo, Bryce, Hene Pounamu, Aretha. We called it the Tide Five, I think, for a while here. But just, to to have a team that was focused on supporting, this important kaupapa, and being open to taking this journey and coming up with the report. And I know that our Toi Whakairo practitioners are very appreciative and also, I think, a little bit surprised, to be honest, that there was somebody wanting to pick this up, and then also that we actually landed at some figures, because artists are non-committal when it comes to, we can tell you what we're going to do, and then they say, how much did it cost? We're like, oh, I don't know, talk to someone else. But I think very surprised, Rangi said, he was pleasantly surprised that we had landed at a place that actually began to define. So, and I know that the political changes has meant that as quick as you were stood up, you've been closed down. But as the tide goes in and out, I think there's some good foundations here to move into the next iteration of vocational learning and what it looks like for Toi Māori. And so even though we take this into the sector, I hope that this doesn't end up with cobwebs and mothballs on the shelf, and it actually is able to be sort of provided forward to whatever the next iteration is. Nō reira, koutou rā, hara mai nei, ki roto i tēnei wānanga kōrero, nei rā, te raukura me te kaukainga e me ana rā, ki tō tāua nei kōrero i tēnei rangi, kei te tuakana, nau i whakaaro, nau i whakahaere, tēnā koe. Hoi no koutou rā e whakarongo mai ki ēnei o ngā whakaaro, me e rao ngā kupu kōrero kā tika piri shasha, te wā i rere atu te Māori ki tā wai, nā e hiake te whakaaro he Toi Whakairo, he Mana Tangata. Ka utonu tātou ki tērā o ngā whakaaro. Haere ake nei, nō rere mi ana tēnā koe, hoi no tēnā tātou katoa. Kia ora.